So Hare Krishna. So welcome back to our Gita and Integrated Yoga course. So this is the last session of this weekend, and we are going to study chapter number 8. So we already, as I mentioned yesterday, we already entered into the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. And this specific chapter, which is called as Akshara Brahma Yoga. So in the previous chapter, we saw how one can learn to connect to Krishna through the process of intellectual conviction. The understanding of Krishna as the absolute truth. He is within him are both matter, spirit, and the controller of both. We saw the difference between the conception of God and the conception of absolute truth. So we saw that concept in chapter number 7, and with that kind of a devotional intellectual conviction, see, there is an element of devotion in all of them, but predominantly it is called, if for those of you like technical terms, so that is called as Jnana Mishra Bhakti, or devotion that is mixed or tinged with Jnana, or this kind of intellectual understanding. In today's chapter, there's another way also of connecting to Krishna, of absorbing in Krishna, which is through meditative absorption, which is called Yoga Mishra Bhakti. So that is a theme that we are going to see in chapter number 8. So let's get started with today's discussion. So beginning with the invocatory prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So let's begin today's chapter with the whiteboard. Okay, and this specific chapter, chapter number 8, which is called as Akshara Brahma Yoga. So Kshara, the word Kshara in Sanskritam means fallible, something that is subjected to degradation, something that is subjected to change. Akshara means infallible, right? So Akshara here means infallible. And Brahma, right, not to be confused with the four-headed creator Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, not that Brahma. The word Brahma here indicates something spiritual. If you remember, we use the same word in chapter number 4, text number 24, Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagno, Brahmano Hutam, Brahmavatena Gantavyam, Brahma Karma Samadhina. The word Brahma had. So there we said Brahma here means as in that something spiritual in nature. Right? So literally this chapter, you can understand yoga of the infallible spirit or the spiritual nature. Here we talk about the spirit, right? So that is the theme. How a yogi, an advanced yogi, uses the methods of Ashtanga Yoga and Shat Chakra Yoga. These are techniques which we'll elaborate later. Right? Based on this kind of yogic skills, one learns to completely disconnect from this world and only absorb in the Lord. And that is how one can attain the transcendent state of this Akshara Brahma. So that is the theme of this chapter. So this chapter, so there's an interesting connection to this chapter from the previous chapter. So if you look at text number 29 and 30 of the previous chapter, so Krishna uses some specific terms. Jara Marana Mokshana Mam Ashrita Yantite Te Brahma Tat Viduhu Krishtam. So Krishna uses the word Brahma here. And Adhyatmam Karma Cha Akhilam. So Adhyatma, Adhyatma, Karma, right? So the translation goes like this. Intelligent people who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. And then the next verse, something that we discussed yesterday also, Krishna uses that those who are in full consciousness of me know me, the Supreme Lord, as a governing principle of this material manifestation. That is Adibuta, Sa Adibuta. So the word is Adibuta. One who knows me as a manifestation of all the devatas, Adi Deva. Adibuta, Adideva, and of all the methods of sacrifice, Adi Yagya. And he says that Prayana Kalecha Mapimam Te Vidur Yukta Chitasa. One who can remember me like this, even at the time of death. So Prayana Kala is the transition time at the time of death. Prayana Kala. Right? So these are some terms that we heard in the last two the verses of the previous chapter. Now Arjuna is going to pick up these terms and ask Krishna, what are all these terms that you're saying? Kim Tad Brahma. So that's how he begins. Arjuna Uvacha, Kim Tad Brahma, Kim Adhyatma, Kim Karma Purushottama, Adibhutam Cha Kim Proktam, Adidevam Kim Uchyate. Right? And then he says, Adi Yagyam Katham Kotra, Deheswin Madhusudana, Prayana Kalecha Katham Gyanosi Niyata. So he says that he asked question basically about all these terms. Krishna, you mentioned about all these terms. What exactly are these terms? Right? What do you mean by Brahma? What is Adhyatma? So this chapter begins with Arjuna's questions. So in the first two verses comes Arjuna's questions. About all these terms that Krishna referred to in the previous chapter. And these are important terms for us to understand. And these are slightly technical terms, though the answer is pretty straightforward in the book, but sometimes if you're not having that kind of a background in the Vedic philosophy, some of these terms, you may be wondering what exactly, I mean, if you read the translation also, Krishna says, for example, the eternal nature of the soul is Adhyatma, actions pertaining to development of material bodies, karma, right? And so this Adibhuta, Adideva. So what exactly this concept? So we'll spend little time, which is slightly off the topic, but it's within the broader context of the Vedic understanding, and of course, very much relevant for us to deeply understand this specific topic. And this is the concept of this multidimensional reality, which I referred to in some of my previous sessions, right? So the principle that one needs to understand that ultimately our understanding of reality is very different, right? In our worldly reality, when there is an external object, right? Like for example, right now I have this pen, right? So when I see the pen, then I interact with the pen, my senses interact with the pen, and the information from the senses goes to my mind, and within my mind, my mental space creates an image of a pen, right? An image, the texture, the feel, whatever I'm getting from that pen, whatever information I'm getting from my senses, the mind being like the little malleable clay dough, which I mentioned in some of my previous sections, right? The mind creates that kind of an image, and that image is what the soul perceives, and that is how an experience is created, right? So this is how in general things happen. So this is how the universe is designed. This is how the creation is designed. So if I were to put it in a very simple language, so this is the golden formula of creation, if you may say. Facility plus knowledge creates experience. Right? Facility plus knowledge creates an experience. So what do I mean by this? So I have a facility, a material facility called as a pen. If I don't know how to use this pen, I will never get the desired experience. Or if I know how to use that, but if I don't have the pen, then again, I will not get the experience. So for an experience to be created, I need some kind of an external facility, and that facility, I need to know how to use that facility, the knowledge component. And when we have these two, that creates the experience, right? And in our worldly interaction also, if you see, right, these three things are always there. You may call this as the subject. The knowledge would be the object, right? And the experience would be their interaction and the result of it. So in our day-to-day interaction, there is subject-object interaction. So there's a teacher, there's a student, and the process of learning, right? For any experience to be created in this world, again, these three things have to be there: subject, object, and their interaction. Now, in the spiritual reality, there are specific energies of the Lord that take care of each of these functions, right? In the Vedic parlance, this facility, when I use the word facility in the spiritual context, we are talking about all the infrastructure of the spiritual world, all the mountains, all the rivers, all the physical manifestations that are there in the spiritual world. The term that is used is called Sandhini Shakti, or the Sandhini potency, which is the entire spiritual infrastructure which is there, right? It is said that this is the expansion of Lord Balaram himself, the brother of Lord Krishna. So it is that Lord Balaram who manifests as this entire Sandhini potency, right? Second, the knowledge facility in the spiritual context is called as Samvit, right? So Samvit, specifically it is described, it is the Vasudeva potency of Krishna who empowers, who creates that sense of awareness. When, like, for example, there is an object, like, for example, a cake in the spiritual world, right? But then the understanding that it is a cake and that it can be used in service of the Lord, right? So a specific understanding is needed, and that understanding is the Samvit potency, right? But when these two come, the experience part, right? And when you understand that, oh, this cake is meant for service of Krishna, and when you offer that cake to Krishna, and when Krishna eats, he experiences happiness. And because Krishna is experiencing happiness, the soul who offered that sweet also experiences happiness, right? So that happiness potency, that experience of happiness, the joy in the spiritual world is what is called as Hladini potency, who is represented by Srimati Radharani, right? So this Samvit, Sandhini, and Hladini potencies, it is their interaction is what that creates all the Lilas, all the spiritual pastimes, right? In fact, the whole so if you see, ultimately, it is that experience is all that matters in the spiritual context. Because the spiritual world, when you say there's a Lila, a spiritual pastime, a Lord's pastime taking place, what does it mean? It is not just an external action. That action is accompanied, for the action to perform, first there has to be some physical arrangement, right? Some physical facility is needed, and to interact and understand with that spiritual facility, there is some knowledge and understanding that is needed. And when then those two perfectly combine, then that creates a beautiful mellow, a beautiful experience, a rasa. That is the Hladini aspect. So literally everything that is happening in the spiritual world is, the important principle is, it's an experience at the level of consciousness, right? So that is and that is what differs spiritual interactions with material interactions. Many times in material interactions, the focus may shift to just the facility or the how to utilize the facility, the knowledge of that. But the experience many times is left in the background. And that is the difference between material consciousness and spiritual consciousness, right? But this principle of facility, knowledge, experience is a universal principle, whether here or there, right? Now, how do I extend this concept in the material realm? So this is the line, the dividing line between spiritual and material worlds. Now, the same three principles, right? Now, in the material world, I do not have spiritual potencies. I don't have spiritual faculties. I do not have spiritual knowledge, right? And I do not have the spiritual experience of joy also. But that experience still needs to be created for the sake of the jiva, right? Because in material world, this whole interaction is happening for the sake of jiva, in a sense that the jiva utilizes its misuses its free will and makes the choice of wanting to be the center of that experience. While in the spiritual world, the center of that experience is Krishna. In the material realm, the center of that material experience, is the jiva, right? However, Krishna is so kind, even though the jiva wants to experience this kind of false experience or some kind of replica experience, right? Krishna still mercifully creates an experience. Okay, my dear child, if this is what you want to play, right? Okay, here is this world. But if for you to experience this kind of false ownership, like I know in India, there's a very common thing. Sometimes when the children, they observe their mother working in the kitchen, right? So the children also want to cook something, they want to imitate their mom, right? But then they can't handle those, the fire equipment and so on, right? Fire equipment, like cooking equipment and so on, because of the heat and the fire involved. So what the mother does, she buys these little toys that look exactly like the mother's stove. There is mother's pressure cooker, or the utensils, etc., etc. And the child starts imitating the mother and plays. So literally Krishna creates that kind of a facility. So now, because I lack in this material world, we do not have spiritual facilities, I need material facilities. And those material facilities are these 24 elements, these 24 material elements, which include earth, water, fire, air, ether. The Sankhya philosophy elaborates on that. So don't worry about the number now. Just understand this whole world, basically Prakriti, which Sankhya explains, is comprised of 24 elements. In 13th chapter, Krishna is going to elaborate on those 24 elements. So we'll elaborate there again, right? Then now material facility is there, but I also need that knowledge, right? But the problem is that I, the soul, cannot interact with this world of matter. I need some interface. I need somebody to, I need a guide to material world, right? And who is this guide to this material world? It is described, Paramatma is that guide to this material world. And specifically, that Paramatma, he facilitates that interaction through the mind, which in turn is further controlled by the devatas or the demigods. Right? I repeat, the soul interacts with this world through its mind, and and of course there are different parts of the body also. Mind also is controlling different parts of the body, right? So that control feature is primarily happening to the devatas. So devatas, not only are they controlling the physical nature, If you remember, in the 3rd chapter, we discussed how the Devatas they are like the cosmic administrators. They are the energy department, water department. We discussed that metaphor. But apart from that, they also have their function of controlling our mind, right? And through the mind, they are helping us to interact with this world. So they are assistants of the Lord in facilitating our interaction with this world. So this is how the entire, the Bhagavad Puran very beautifully explained the creation. This is how it unfolds, right? So it is just like when you create a building or any facility, a government or any kind of an organization, you need to also ensure that the governance is happening properly, right? So it's not just bringing all the material elements for the sake of whoever wants to live there. You just construct a building and then you say, okay, now you go live. No, you need a watchman, you need somebody taking care of the water supply, you need somebody to take care of electricity, somebody who does the regular maintenance, right? So this entire functionality has to be there. A support structure has to be there for the resident to peacefully live and interact with the infrastructure of that building. Likewise, for the Jiva to happily reside in this body and interact with this world through this body and mind, there are certain controllers who are the Devatas who are facilitating by controlling different parts of our body, right? There's like, for example, so this is a concept that very beautifully is explained in the Aitreya Upanishad. We'll not go into too many details of that, but the Aitreya Upanishad explains that how, for example, Surya is controlling our eyes, our perception, our ability to see. Agni is controlling our Jiva, the tongue. Ashwini Kumaras are there in our ears. These are all the names of different Devatas, right? And even after all these Devatas, they took their respective charge of the functions of the body. The Jiva's body was not functioning yet. So they were wondering, why is it that? Then Paramatma enters into the body and then he activates. He's the one who turns on the engine of this body, and that's how the world begins. The Jiva starts to interact with this world, etc., etc. The material experience begins, right? So the principle, in a very less complicated way, is that for the Jiva to interact with this world of 24 elements, it needs an interface which is facilitated through these Devatas. So this concept, this Vedic creation concept, is explained through these terms that we used here in this verse. So this concept of this, the reality at the level of these 24 elements is what is called as Adibuta. Adibuta. So this level of reality operating at the Devatas level is called as Adideva. And this level of reality directly operating the level of the soul is what is called as Adhyatma. Right? So all these three together, when they combine, they create what we call as material experience. So all these three dimensions of realities, they're overlapping, right? So just to give you a more, maybe a better word to explain this, right? So we can call this Adibhuta level of understanding as the physical reality, right? What we observe today in this world, what modern science especially has become so expert in explaining, is the physical world. Adhideva is what you may call it as the metaphysical, quantum, level of reality, or at a psychic level, at the energy level, right? Whatever you connect with, you understand, that is the Adideva version of reality. And Adhyatma is the spiritual aspect of reality, right? Directly at the level of the soul. Now, all these three levels of reality are combining and creating what you see all around you, right? To give you a simple example, right, of all these three levels, let's analyze the phenomena of the sun, right? The sunrise, for example, at a physical level of reality, at the Adibhuta level of reality, right? One may say, oh, it is the rotation of Earth. which is causing the phenomena of sunrise, right? So we understand this, how modern science explains. Sun is stationary. As the earth is moving, right, at a certain point, it seems like the sun rays are falling and it seems like the sun is rising. So it means sun is coming into our manifestation. It is not that the sun is moving, but it is the earth which is moving. So that is the physical level of reality. At a physical level, that explanation is right. But at a adhyatma, at Adideva, at this quantum or metaphysical level of reality, sun is also a devata, who is the sun god, if you may say, or he has a specific name, Vivaswan. So it is this Vivaswan who is described, who is operating on his chariot, and it is his movement at Adi Daiva level which is creating an experience of sunrise at a physical level. I hope you are able to connect this multidimensional reality. There is something happening at a higher dimension, but its impact or its perception at a lower dimension is observed in a totally different way, right? And because we are not able to see that higher dimensional reality, many times we settle for what we can see through our senses at a physical level of reality, right? And this is where many times certain psychic concepts, certain metaphysical concepts, we cannot understand through our physical senses, but using your subtle body, using your psychic states, you'll be able to perceive that level of reality, right? I'm going to give you another example a little later that will make it even more clear. Let me finish this, right? What is a spiritual explanation of sunrise? It is described, sun is actually the eyes of the sun, and moon are the eyes of the Lord. So literally it is, you can say that the Lord has opened his eyes. Lord opened his eyes, right? So what do we mean by Lord is opening his eyes? Means when the Lord sees, we can see. And for us to see, I need light on a physical level. Therefore, the act of Lord opening his eyes creates the concept that now I'm qualified to see this world of darkness by providing light. And therefore, Vivaswan moves. And because Vivaswan moves, I see at a physical level that the sun is now rising. So all these three are highly integrated and, an overlapped phenomena, right? And unfortunately today, because we lack this perception of multidimensional realities, it becomes very challenging for us to understand certain Vedic concepts. But actually, the great acharyas of the past, they have experienced these higher dimensional realities and presented in Vedic texts like Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. And if you try to connect them at a physical level, so we cannot observe it, right? So, or another worldly example I can give you is, for example, internet. So what is the internet? Now, I know that when I ask at my level, if I use my phone, I go into Google, I type something, I get information, right? I understand that. But if you really, really want to understand what is internet, like when you open a web page, you will see, oh, I can shop on this particular site. Oh, here are the products. I click, and I get a product. But are there products floating in that internet? Are things coming from that? No, things are coming from a physical place to a physical place, but all of this exists in a psychic dimension on the internet place. So a good way to understand the quantum reality or psychic realities or energy level of realities is by understanding how internet. So where is the internet? Internet is not physically present in one place. It is distributed all over the world, all the servers across the world, internet is distributed. To you and me, it seems so accessible, like, oh, I just have to click in my phone, click, and I can access internet, I can do whatever I want, right? It seems like internet is in my phone. But actually, there is no one thing called as internet. It is not one physical substance that, this is the internet, right? It is distributed everywhere, right? But functionally, it seems like it is there somewhere, and I click, the information goes there, and I collect it back, right? Another example of this multidimensional reality, for example, the present scenario. Suppose if there is a pandemic or any form of disease, right? At a physical level of reality, one may say, oh, the disease is due to some bacteria or some virus, right? So that is true at the physical level, that is the virus. But then the question that comes, if indeed viruses affect people, why is it that not everyone is getting affected by the virus? Why only some people are getting affected, some people are not getting affected? So clearly, if virus is the cause of disease, then virus is there everywhere, everyone should get affected. Then what is the reason for the difference? So for that, you cannot answer it at a physical level, you have to go one level deeper. So at one level deeper level, one may say, oh, actually, it is virus is not the reason for disease. It could be some kind of a planetary alignment, or simple words, it is the karma of some person, the karmic influence of the person due to planets, the present phase of life the person is going through, and because that is prone to be affected by disease, therefore now the person got disease, right? Now that is the Adideva version of reality. The Adhyatmic version of understanding is disease in itself is a manifestation of tamas or tamogun, right? So such a person, so each of these three experts, so if there's an Adibuta expert, such a person's diagnosis will be, you are diseased because of virus, so here is the pill. Therefore they take the pill with the understanding that, okay, I have to kill the virus. At Adideva, person will say, no, actually it is due to certain planetary alignment, karmic influences, so you may have to do this is counteractive measures, and that is how you'll be able to overcome this particular disease or any kind of phase of life, right? It is not that they will not take a pill. They may also take a pill, but not with the intention of killing the virus, but with the intention that this is also part of my things that I need to do as part of overcoming my karma or counteracting my planetary influences, right? Whereas the third person, the Adhyatmic person, when they observe, oh, I'm affected by tamogun, they will say, oh, actually, I need to raise the level of sattva. I need to focus. In fact, the reason why the whole world is suffering is because there's so much of tamogun. Look, there's so much of killing of animals. There's so much of abuse of mother nature happening. These are all tamasic things, destructive things. And because the entire planet is right now going through a very bad state of tamas because of, the tamasic demoniac leadership or the tamasic leadership all over the world, and that kind of greed and selfish driven mentality that has come even among the masses, that tamogun is the cause for all of these kind of problems that are going on in the world. So the solution would be that we need to raise the level of spiritual awareness, and that will solve the broader problems of this world, right? So all three have their own perspectives and their own approaches because they are seeing reality at their own dimension. But all three are true. That's the point. It is not that Adhyatma alone, the spiritual dimension alone is true and the physical dimension is false. Now, sometimes you may have to take solutions or preventive measures at a physical level. Sometimes you have to take preventive measures at a metaphysical level, sometimes at a spiritual level, right? But acknowledging that these three dimensions operate, they exist, they are true, is what a progressive Vedic spiritual seeker will understand. And therefore, they learn to tune their life accordingly and take up to solutions accordingly, like that. So with this background, now let us actually begin. What are the responses that Krishna gives with respect to these Arjuna's questions, right? So this was page number 1. Okay, so now from text number 3 and 4, we are going to see Krishna's responses to Arjuna's questions. So Krishna's reply. So what does Krishna say? That this, so let's take up all those terms. So Arjuna asks, what is Brahman, right? So Kim Tat Brahman. So he says that this indestructible transcendental living entity is called as Brahman. So which means the living entity, the Jiva, the soul, is what is referred to as Brahman, right? So now many times this is a misunderstanding sometimes people may carry. So Brahman is not just that impersonal state, but that all-pervading light. That alone is not Brahman. But many times in the Vedic literature, that even that impersonal light is described in a sense that, if you remember yesterday's discussion, the previous session's discussion, we spoke about the concept of God. The definition of that God, God, generator, operator, destroyer, was specifically connected to the material world. What is he generating? The material. What is he operating? The material. What is he destroying? The material world. So then the Vedantic scholars ask the question that, or try to find answer to this question: is there an understanding of God independent of this world? Because right now I'm only giving his job description in respect to world. So his very existence is pinned to this world. But is there an understanding of God beyond the understanding of this world also? So the first level of that understanding is this concept of Brahman. Brahman means a non-spiritual state. Technically, it is indescribable, but we can just say Brahman means a non-material state. And because it's non-material, it is spiritual. So anything spiritual, as a definition, as a broad category, is called as Brahman. So Krishna's effulgence, his aura, is also called Brahman. Sometimes Krishna himself is referred to as Brahman, right? In that all-pervasive aspect. The Jiva, the living entity, is also spiritual. That is also referred to as Brahman, right? So one should not confuse that. Is this definition saying then Jiva and Krishna are one and the same, right? So again, going back to our yesterday's metaphor in the Q&A session, I spoke about sunlight and sun's light, referring to the moonlight, right? So this commonality one needs to understand, and at commonality level, the common word that is used is Brahman. So that is the background. So Kim Tad Brahman, then Kim Adhyatma. Then he says, what is Adhyatma? That nature of the Jiva, the nature of the Jiva, nature of the self, right? That is called as Adhyatma. So there is a living entity, but that living entity has a specific nature, in a sense that where it is expressing that sense of self, right? So that is, or in other words, you can just say that the soul is expressing itself to the medium of consciousness, and that is what is creating that experience. That is how we understand our spiritual nature, right? So many times again we combine Brahman and Adhyatma. We combine the soul and its consciousness, but there's a slight technicality of the difference. So the soul and its consciousness, the nature of the Jiva, right? That is the Adhyatma. Then what is karma? So then Krishna defines actions pertaining to the development of this material body. So actions that leading to material body, right? That is a whole law of karma, right? Law of action and reaction. Whatever I do, accordingly I get its reaction. So that is how the principle of law of karma works, and Krishna is just repeating that, right? So then he describes what is Adibuta. So, oh Arjuna, the physical nature here, right? The material nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adibuta. So Adibuta here is now referring to this material nature, this constantly changing material nature. That is the nature of these 24 elements. They're constantly going through their vikaras. Vikaras means transformations, right? That is why the world is always changing. Even right now, as you see, the wall behind me is crumbling. You may not notice it now, but at atomic level, it is going through change. That is the nature of the gunas. Gunas are constantly in a state of a dynamic flux, right? But if you want to really notice a crumbling, you have to come back after 10 years, maybe 30 years, maybe 100 years. Probably after 100 years, the wall itself may not exist. It may completely collapse, right? So, but there is crumbling happening. It is not that suddenly one day at the 100th year, the wall collapses. No, minute by minute, moment by moment, second by second, nanosecond by nanosecond, this wall is crumbling. It is going through a change. That is the nature of this Adibuta, right? Then Adideva are these controlling devatas, and this this embodiment of all these devatas is called as the universal form of the Lord. Universal form, which is the embodiment of all devatas. Now, this also needs little explanation, right? Because the devatas together, they function in such wonderful cohesive way that it seems like it is as good as one body. Now, many times we use this term also, like the body of governance, right? The body of the government, where prime minister or the president is the head, the finance minister are the arms, the defense minister are the feet, whatever, like, so you may give. So it is not that when you go to, for example, in India, if you go to Delhi, it is not that you will see some kind of a body, a physical body called as the government with the prime minister sitting at its head. There's nothing like that, but it's a functional representation. So the concept of the universal form is also like that. It is a functional representation of how ultimately all these devatas, all these cosmic controllers, they are working in such wonderful cohesive way, and that body which forms is also the Lord, and that form is called a universal form of the Lord. That's something that we will see a little later, a slightly different version of the universal form that we will see in the 11th chapter of this book, right? So Adi Devata is that universal form, embodiment of all the devatas, right? And then he says that Adi Yagya, who is that ultimate, whenever we perform any activity, ultimately who is the one who's witnessing those activities and ultimately accepting those activities, right? So who is that eternal constant witness to all my actions? If you remember, we discussed the whole concept of yagya, right? Yagya here now is not just talking about the fire sacrifice yagya, but we are talking about all the yagya 2.0 also. So every time, I'm putting my attachments in the fire of purpose, who is awarding me that purification? Who is watching me? Because some of these things can be so personal, internal, mental. Some sacrifices can be internal also. So who is witnessing those? They said it's a Paramatma, it is a super soul. Right? So within every body, there is a soul and a manifestation of the Lord called as a super soul, who's called as Paramatma or the super soul. He is the one who is, he is the Lord of all sacrifices, like that. And then he says, knowing him, knowing that this Lord is at the time of death, right? That is what one has to do. And this is how, one is trying to remember Krishna. So that is the Prayana Kala aspect that Krishna is going to talk about, how to remember Krishna at the time of one's departure. So why suddenly this concept of departure and what exactly is concept of departure? So that will now be very nicely highlighted in the next section from text number 5 through 7, which I like to call as another yagya, but this is called the Yagya of Death. Even the death of this body is also kind of yagya, right? So what are we doing here? So very nicely Krishna explains, whoever at the time of his, at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Attains my nature as in they'll attain that spiritual nature, that Brahman-ness, one will be able to realize. So remembering Krishna at the time of death. Why does it work? How does this concept work? Very, very important verse here. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. So whatever is the predominant consciousness at the time of death, the soul has that as its main desire, and therefore material nature facilitates that desire, avoiding the body suitable to that desire. If one at the time of death, imagine a person all life they are wanting to enjoy in certain way. And even the time of their death, they are thinking, oh, I will not be able to enjoy anymore. This body is going to die. Right? And therefore, if enjoyment is the dominant consciousness, right? And provided the person also lived a suitably good pious life or whatever, or he has good positive karma to facilitate, then at the time of death, material nature based on his karma will give him a new body that matches his specific desire, where whatever he'll continue in this whole cycle of enjoyment, and again birth and death and birth and death, it continues. That is how material nature facilitates, right? So important thing to understand is the consciousness at the time of death is very, very important. Literally, this is such a powerful principle that literally, and it is not that you can cheat Krishna saying, oh, all my life I will do whatever nonsense I want, but exactly the time of my death I will just remember Krishna. It doesn't happen that way. It's not that you will say Krishna and shoot yourself. We are not talking about what you are doing before killing yourself also. Even if somebody does that, right, then even after death, even when you're no more in control of your body, there are still some thoughts that are lingering in your mind which you cannot control, right? So that is the level of control that ideally we should develop, or that is the level at which we are trying to purify ourselves. Even at that completely helpless state where my body and mind are also not in my control, at the time of my death, what will be my dominant thought? That is something that we really need to work on, and that is this whole Yaga of Death. So literally, you cannot do that in the just by 1 day training or 1 hour training or even like 1 year training. Your entire life is a preparation. So if life is a preparation, then death is the ultimate examination, right? So therefore, one has to very, very consciously work through all their life, and that is how one will be able to maintain their consciousness at the time of their death. And how do I do that? So to do that, Krishna gives a very, very powerful solution. He says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu ma manusmara yuddhevacha mai arpita mano buddhir ma meveshesi asamshayaha. Right? So what does it say? That always think of Krishna. So it is text number 7. It says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu. At all times, always think of Krishna. Ma manusmara yuddhevacha, which means, carry out your prescribed duty. Carry out your duties, your prescribed duty, right? Then, mai arpita mano buddhir. Dedicate all your actions, dedicate everything. Dedicate your actions, arpita mana, buddhi, mind, intelligence, your actions, dedicate all of them to Krishna. So if one follows this principle, then one will be able to perform this Yaga of Death. So what is that Yaga of Death? Ultimately, going back to our Yaga metaphor. So what are we doing? In the fire of Krishna, if I offer my consciousness, right? In the fire of Krishna, if I offer my consciousness, then I will experience a spiritual state at the time of my death. This is the death Yaga, or the Yaga of Death that Krishna is talking about. And this is something that you have to prepare for all your life. Usually when we perform a Yaga, we just start the preparation 1 day before or 1 week before. But this death Yaga, we have to constantly prepare all our life. And it does not mean you only now start thinking about Krishna all the time. But see, look at the very balanced approach Krishna is giving. Always think of Krishna, carry out your duty, right? and dedicate your actions and mind and intelligence to Krishna. Again, if you connect it to our previous our integrated yoga principle, right? Krishna is going to repeat this again and again. Always think of Krishna, right? So how are we thinking of Krishna? By learning to see Krishna in everything. So that is a jnana aspect. Carry out your duty, that is a karma aspect. Then dedicate everything to Krishna, that is a surrender, that is a bhakti aspect. So this is again the same repackaged version of the same principle that we've been studying throughout this book, right? So that is the Yaga of Death, very, very powerful principle. And now Krishna is going to specifically focus about how using that kind of a devotional meditation, or if I may say meditative absorption, how one can remember him. And that is going to be a theme where from text number 8 through 13, Krishna is going to talk about how one can attain to that attaining spiritual state. Right? Specifically from the Ashtanga Yoga context or from the Dhyana context. Right? So what does he say? Text number 8, he says, he who abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa na anya gamina param purusham divyam yati partha anuchintayan. So abhyasa yoga yuktena. So the important principle is saying that you have to practice abhyasa. Practice by what? Yoga yuktena. By practicing this yoga, specifically meaning here the process of connection to Krishna, right? Then by engaging one's mind completely and remembering him undeviated from this path, such a person is sure to remember him. And how to remember Krishna then? But first thing I need to think of Krishna. What is a form? How am I supposed to remember him? Right? So very beautifully, what is the philosophical way of remembering Krishna? How a yogi remembers Krishna? A very beautiful verse which comes here. Kavim Puranam Anushasitaram Aniyor Aniyamsha Anusmaritya Sarvasva Dhataram Achintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat. One should meditate upon the Supreme Lord as the one who knows everything. Kavim, who is the oldest, Puranam, Anushasitaram, and who is a controller. Aniyor Aniyamsha, who's smaller than the smallest. Anusmaridya, one has to remember. Sarvasva Dhataram, one who's beyond all material conceptions and inconceivable. And Achintya Rupam, he is a person, he has a form. Aditya Varnam, he is luminous like the sun, Aditya. Tamasa Parastat, who's beyond the tamas, beyond the ignorance, the darkness of this material nature. So this is how a yogi remembers. So how to meditate on Krishna? Right? So it is not some kind of a philosophical understanding alone, right? And then it becomes like a jnana, right? But ultimately, even that jnana has to culminate into dhyana. So jnana has to, that knowledge has to culminate into a kind of a dhyana or meditation. So while we understood in text number 9 what is a philosophical conception of remembering the Lord, but a yogi now tries to feel that presence of Lord within one's heart. Right? Oh Krishna, you are that person who is beyond all darkness. Oh Krishna, you are luminous like the sun. You are smaller than the smallest, which means you are there right now in my heart as Paramatma. Right? So with that feeling, a yogi starts to make. This is a devotional yogi, remember, right? So this is bhakti, yoga mishra bhakti. Such a devotee, but he prefers, his conviction is more on the yoga aspect. So such a person is remembering the dhyana aspect. So he's trying to meditate on the Lord with that kind of a feeling of a feeling brought about by this kind of a philosophical understanding, like that. So that is the dhyan that a yogi performs. And when one does that, one follows a procedure of elevating the soul, literally pushing the soul out of the body And the technique is what is called as the Chakra Yoga. So the whole process of how, by remembering Krishna, one can literally release the soul out of this body is very beautifully described in the subsequent verses. One who at the time of death fixes his life air between his eyebrows, and by the strength of yoga, with an undeviated mind, engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord, will attain the Lord. Persons who are learned in the Vedas, so what is fixing the life air between the eyebrows, right? So this is the Agya Chakra, and one starts to focus on one's Agya Chakra, right? And then they start to chant the Omkara, utter the Omkara, and who are the great sages in renounce order, they thus enter into Brahman, like that. And the yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart, and fixing them and the life air on top of the head, one establishes himself in yoga. And after being situated in this yoga practice, vibrating the sacred syllable Om, one thinks of the Supreme Lord, and when he quits one body, one certainly attains to the spiritual planet. So this is a whole Chakra Yoga. So from text number 10 to 14, this concept is called as Shad Chakra Yoga. Shad is the Sanskritam prefix for the number 6. Chakras are the chakras in our body, and yoga is the higher linking process. So such a Ashtanga yogi, what happens? Using certain bandhas, locks within the body, one traps the life air, in the region around the heart. It literally, if I may give a metaphor, it is like shaking a bottle of soda. So when you cover the lid and when you shake the bottle of soda, right, and when you then suddenly open the lid, what happens? With great pressure, the soda comes out, right? So likewise, so the life air, which are the pranavayus which are there in the body, the yogi tries to first pump them up, excite them, and maybe not excite may not be the right word, but raise their energy levels, and thereby raising their energy levels is the process of raising the energy through these chakras within the body. And that is how one creates an environment internally wherein now under these locks, the pranavayu is so pressurized. And then thinking about the Lord, reciting the Omkara, meditating on one's Agya Chakra, when one releases the lock, then literally the soul is pushed out of the body, right? It described it from the heart, and the heart is also described like a lotus, indicating it's like an inverted lotus. Such specific descriptions, because if you look at the 4 chambers of the heart, right, and if you look like a cross-sectional view of the heart, it looks like some kind of an inverted lotus. It is described that the soul from that inverted lotus, it goes up, it passes through the uvula, the little small tongue that we have at the back of our neck. It passes through that region, and then it comes to the Brahmarandra, and from there the yogi releases the soul to the preferred spiritual destination that one has, like that. So this is the method of Chakra Yoga way of leaving one's body, right? Now, after having described this whole yogic way of leaving one's body, Krishna again clarifies that, oh Arjuna, in text number 15, he says, 14, he says, so this was 10 to 13, and in text number 14, Krishna says that Ananya Chetasa Satatam Yomam Smarati Nityasaha Tasyaham Sulabha Partha Nitya Yuktasya Yoginaha. One who always remembers me without deviation. Ananya Chetasa. So this undeviated remembrance. Undeviated remembrance. One who has this, for such a person, attaining a spiritual destination is very easy. Such a person need not go through this kind of a complicated yogic way of leaving one's body. But ultimately, if you remember, what did I say? Your dominant consciousness in the time of death determines your destination. If your dominant consciousness in the time of your death is love for Krishna, right? Naturally, that love for Krishna will become your vehicle to transfer the soul from this world to the spiritual world. And that is what the undeviated remembrance means, that loving devotional remembrance, right? So though this chapter is predominantly talking about the yogic way of, or the the Yoga Mishra way of leaving one's body, but still Krishna, time and again, you would have noticed throughout the Bhagavad Gita, he's also revealing his personal recommendation to Arjuna. So this is one of those personal recommendation verses. There are general descriptions and there are personal recommendations. So to Arjuna is specifically saying that for my devotees, I'm easy to obtain because their love for me will become the carrier of the soul to the next life, like that. Then after describing that, he says that after attaining the great souls who are yogis in devotion, never return to this temporary world which is full of miseries, right? So there's a very nice, beautiful description. So literally from text number 15 through all the way till 22, right? So there is nice description of spiritual reality. Description of spiritual reality. And it's also compared with material reality also, right? Material world and spiritual world, right? So what does it say? That when one goes to spiritual world, so this is the nature of the spiritual world. So let's actually make a little table thing here. So this is spiritual world and this is the material world. So what does it say? After attaining me, the great souls, the yogis, they never have to return to this temporary world which is full of miseries. On the contrary, from the highest planet to the lowest planet, everybody has to go through a cycle of birth and death. So in material world, birth and death are unavoidable. Whereas in the spiritual world, right, one who goes there never has to come back. Right? Then he continues further saying that he talks about the destruction of this material world. At the beginning of Brahmaji's creation, all living entities, they come into a manifest state. Then at the end, again, they go through their whole cycle of destruction. Literally, this whole material world will ultimately be destroyed. Even up to Brahmaji himself is also living, and even he will be destroyed. Whereas, parastasmat tu bhavyanyo avyakto avyaktat sanatanaha. There is another unmanifest nature. Material world seems to be manifest here, but right now there is an unmanifest nature. This word unmanifest is very, very interesting. Unmanifest does not mean it is not present. It is present, but right now it is not perceptible to us. That is what the word unmanifest, very, very choicest words Prabhupada would always use for his translation. So this unmanifest world is a spiritual world, which right now I cannot see, but I cannot deny its existence just because I cannot see it. It is unmanifested, right? So like that, like future, for example, future exists, but right now it is unmanifested before our eyes, like that, something like that. So, and the nature of this is, it is permanent. Spiritual world is permanent, whereas material world is temporary, ultimately is going to be destroyed. Then he continues to say, that place which is permanent, from where when nobody has to come back, the great Vedantis explain, that is my abode. Tad dhama yam prapya na nivartante tad dhama paramama. That place where, that permanent place where nobody has to come back, right? Krishna explains, this is Krishna's abode. This is his spiritual world. So clearly Krishna is indicating his position beyond this world. Krishna's abode, his world, like that. So then after having described this, so Krishna is going to go through some technicalities. So let's take a new sheet. And in a sense, if you see the pattern that we had, we always discussed a challenge and a problem. So this whole section is the problem part. Text number 24 through literally 28. This is the challenge of this chapter. So we'll call it as rules of death. So the problem in practicing, the challenge in this kind of a Chakra Yoga, the yogic way of departing, right, is the very nature of this process, which is very difficult. And if in case you're wondering why difficult, I can do it, right? So just hear the rules and regulations and you will understand why it is so complicated and difficult, right? So these are certain rules that one has to follow. Text number 23, Krishna says, now I'm going to tell you certain rules in terms of there are certain times of the day and year and so on when one has to follow at the time, one has to follow to die. So what are those? Agnir Jyotir Aha Shuklaha. So those who know the Supreme Brahman attain the Supreme by passing away from this world. So when is the right time? The right time is under the influence of the fiery god, under the influence of Agni. Again, little explanation here. So these concepts are very beautifully explained in the Upanishads also, right? What do you mean by influence of the Agni? See, understand that even that soul's final journey is done through Agni, right? That is why in the Vedic culture also, if you see how there is Agni Samskara, if you heard that term, what we call as the funeral ceremony, the fire on which the body is burnt in Vedic tradition, it is described Agni is one of the assistants of the Lord who helps the soul in its next journey. So when that Agni Samskara is performed, the soul is transferred from this body. Literally the connection to this body is disconnected, and as part of Agni through the material nature's operations allows the soul to go on to the next body, right? But then it is not that that physical Agni, physical fire is needed, but this Devata of Agni, under his shelter, under his protection, one has to leave one's body. So one has to be careful as to, is it the path of light or is it the path of darkness, one has to see. So Agni, then Jyotir, because Agni then under the influence of the path of light. So what is this path of light? Again, in this interdimensional travel, it is described that there is the path of light and there's a path of darkness that takes you down into the nether regions. So we have to follow the path of light under the influence of Agni. Then one more principle. At the auspicious moment of the day, you have to check, what is a muhurta? You have to check the auspicious time. Right? You cannot just die anytime you want. You have to check also the muhurat and the sea. And then during the fortnight of the waxing moon, not the waning moon, from new moon day till full moon day, Amavasya to Purnima, when the moon size is increasing, that is also important. And not only that, during the time of the Uttarayana. Uttarayana is the time when the sun is moving upwards, right? So if you see, there is a summer solstice and winter solstice. So if you see, even if you from a static position, if you observe the sunrise every day, you will see that the sun is not rising at the same spot and setting or rising at the same spot every day. It also keeps moving. Not only is it moving horizontally, but it also is moving vertically. So if you follow the trajectory of the sun, it seems like it is going up and also coming down. So the rising up part, that is called as a Uttarayana Dasha. Uttarayana, literally from the summer solstice till the time when the sun is at its peak. Literally that the Jan Sankranti period till somewhere till mid-June or something. This is the time. 6 months after that, right? So around July. So some Sankranti to July, somewhere around that period is where this Uttarayana Kala happens. And likewise, Dakshinayana is the time when the sun is going down. So then rightwise, there are also the wrong times. So what are the wrong times to die? So one who passes from this world during the smoke. So opposite of Agni is the smoke. He is the counter, If Agni is the positive side, smoke is a negative side. Then during the night time, during the path of darkness, then tatha during the Krishna Paksha, mean that, you know, during inauspicious time, during the waning moon, and during the Dakshinayana time, when the sun is moving downwards. It is called a Dakshinayana. Right. So during this time, when one goes, so such a person has to come back. Such a person dies in darkness, and such a person has to come back. So he gives this all the specific rules and regulations, and it seems like, you know, my God, I can't even die peacefully. I'll be so much anxiety at the time of my death. I have to check the clock, you know, what is the time? Is it the right time? And, you know, is it the waning moon, waxing moon? Is it the sun in Uttarayana? This becomes so complicated, right? However, Krishna gives the solution also. The solution is very, very nice. And this is one of the important words here, that although, you know, Nete sthiti parthajanam yogi muhyati kaschana tasmat sarveshu kaleshu yoga yukta bhavarjuna. That of these two, one who is intimately connected to the Lord, like one who's like a devoted yogi, one who's a devotee, even though they know these two paths, they never get bewildered, right? Therefore, yoga yukta bhavarjuna, always remain very strongly connected to me. So solution is that always remain strongly connected to Krishna. Because when I say strongly connected, when one develops a strong loving connection to Krishna, it is the love which becomes the important carrier, and that will ensure that there is success even at the death yajna. Always remain strongly connected to Krishna. Right? Or always remain devoted to Krishna. And such a person, if he takes up to this devotional activity or this devotional remembrance very strongly, what happens? Vedeshu yagyeshu tapassu cheva daneshu yat punya phalam pradishtam. That such a person is never bereft of all these things, of studying the Vedas, Veda, Yagya, performing different varieties, Yagya, Tapa, performing different austerities, Dana, performing different charities, Punya Phalam, all the pious activities, right? Even philosophical pursuits, fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, one attains to all of the perfection of all of this, and he reaches the supreme abode. Yogi param sthanam upeti chadyam. So simply by devotional connection, simply by the strong devotional connection, one attains the spiritual perfection. So that is the solution. So if a yogi who is not devoted to the Lord, then for them to attain to a higher state, right? So they'll have to follow all these rules and regulations, and, you know, very, very complicated process. But even such a Yoga Mishra Bhakta also, right, who's a devotee, but he has a very strong yogic inclination. So for them, you know, one has to understand that because that strong connection to Krishna, that spiritual perfection will automatically come like that. So by describing this, you know, he is indirectly establishing the supremacy of that kind of a devotional remembrance, right? So if you remember in the previous chapter, I said that we are filling that circle, right? Karma on the platform of jnana, and in the bubble we're discussing the bhakti aspect, and that bhakti we said is about remembering Krishna, and that remembering Krishna can happen at three ways: through intellectual conviction, which we saw in the last chapter, and now today we saw how through meditative absorption also one can attain to Krishna, right? But throughout in 7th chapter, 8th chapter, and practically throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we have seen time and again when Krishna had to give his personal recommendation to Arjuna, he would always talk about a devotional process, about loving devotion, right? And that is going to be the main theme. Literally, this next two chapters, the 9th and 10th chapters, you can say are the heart and the heart of the heart. At the heart of the heart is the soul. Literally, the soul of Bhagavad Gita, these next two chapters. Very, very powerful chapters, very, very important chapters, where Krishna is going to talk about how to remember him in loving devotion. And what does that state feel like? And what does it take to actually come to that state? Right? Very, very instructive, very powerful chapters. Literally, the entire essence of the essence of the essence of Bhagavad Gita, it comes. In fact, there are 4 specific verses that we will see in the 10th chapter, which the acharyas with the previous spiritual preceptors, they call that as the summary of entire Bhagavad Gita. So all of that we are going to discuss in the future sessions. So that is so next weekend will be your study break. We'll not be having classes because we already covered a big major chunk of the Bhagavad Gita. And some of you had expressed that we need to catch up with all these chapters. So it also be a good revision time. Please, if possible, the recordings are there on YouTube. So please, access those recordings. Please go through them. And I strongly, strongly recommend, please read the purports of Srila Prabhupada in all these chapters. So that way you are ready. And before we enter into the most sacred section of Bhagavad Gita, we are clear, we are purified our consciousness by understanding all the first 8 chapters. So that is what something we're going to do. So next weekend, we'll not have our regular discussion. We'll resume the weekend after that, which is, also that will be part of our international yoga day celebrations here at Govardhan School of Yoga. So as part of the celebrations, we'll have these lecture series also. So, all right. So thank you all so much for joining us in today's session. Slightly technical session, but I hope you all found it interesting. So let's now open the forum for any questions or comments that you may have. Let's see if we have any questions. Would anybody like to? Oh, I already see. Okay, Gail, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Oh boy, Prabhu, I have so many, but anyway, so many.
Good.
You were, you mentioned everything, when we do everything for Krishna, that's karma. When we see everything as Krishna, that's jnana. Surrendering everything, that's bhakti. So can you distinguish between doing everything for Krishna physically, right? And surrendering everything? Why wouldn't we consider surrendering everything? I know bhakti involves emotions, but why this distinction between doing everything for Krishna and surrendering? It's a little blurry for me.
Okay. No, in that context, I was drawing parallels with the definition of Buddhi Yoga that we discussed in chapter 2, where we've always been writing about action on the platform of knowledge with the mood and intention of devotion. So trying to draw parallels with that, right? It is not that bhakti has no actions involved or jnana has no mood involved. It is not like that. When we are talking about karma yoga, the moment you use the word yoga or connection to the Lord, that connection can only happen through some kind of a devotional connection only, right? So it is not that the actions part are not bhakti and only the remembrance part is that's, but that's not the right understanding. In that context, what I mentioned there was that tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, that verse 8.7. I was trying to draw parallels with the integrated yoga method that Krishna spoke about, right? And that will also be relevant for us because if you remember in that chapter, I mentioned how Prabhupada so brilliantly, he titles that chapter as Contents of Gita Summarized. Because literally you will see that theme will keep repeating over and over and over again. So again, in this chapter, the same theme of integration of all this, of action, knowledge, and devotion. The same theme, again, Krishna is talking about that. So just to draw parallels, I made that statement.
Okay. Also, again, with this feelings thing, did I hear you properly when you were talking about Ashtanga Yoga? I think maybe when you were talking about going from jnana to dhyana, did you talk about feelings?
Yes,
there
yes,
also?
yes, yes.
Can you elaborate or repeat that part?
Okay. So now, traditionally, or not traditionally, sorry, even the way the modern interpretation of the Ashtanga Yoga somehow, unfortunately, disconnects it from the original teachings of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. In the Yoga Sutras, one of the very important angas or limbs he talks about in the second chapter, he says, Tapaha Swadhyaya Ishwara Pranidhana. So repeatedly, Patanjali talks about the concept of this pranidhana. Pranidhana literally means to surrender to the Lord. It means to come forward and to bend, to bow down. That's a symbol of surrender. So he talks about this kind of surrendering to the Lord, surrendering to Ishvara as an important element. And when he describes, very interesting, I didn't talk about this earlier, but in how to remember the Lord, in 8.9 Kavim Puranam Anushasitaram, so this is how a yogi remembers the Lord. Very, very similar description Patanjali also gives in the first chapter, in the Samadhi Pada, when the Ishvara concept is introduced in Sutra number 23, 24 to 29, he describes who this Ishvara is. How are you supposed to remember the Ishvara? Even there he says, he is the original guru of all guru. He is the original source. Just like how he's the oldest person. And while describing this Ishvara, he further says that the Ishvara is addressed through the pranava, to the omkara. Just like how even here Krishna says the yogi, focusing the life air in between their eyebrows, chants the omkara. The om is that symbol of the Lord. And then he says, to realize that one thing is addressing, but to realize the Lord as his name, he says, tat japaha artha bhavna. You have to invest your feelings. And feeling fully, one has to repeatedly chant his names. So it is not that a yogi is very stone-like, but rather a yogi also exhibits feelings. And if you want a very nice understanding of this concept, in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Kapila Muni also talks about this kind of a devotional yogic meditation. And there is a beautiful description of how in that state of dharana and dhyana, how a yogi starts to visualize the different limbs of the Lord and and gets overwhelmed in loving devotion, and literally tears come out of the eyes of the yogi, right? So that is a description. So there are feelings involved even in the yogic meditation. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, because like you said, when we think of yogis, we think no emotions, they're just meditating only, so I guess that's just like some kind of myth, right? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, somehow the modern interpretation of these concepts somehow have been distorted because of mixing from various other traditions also. In fact, if I may say, in the modern understanding of Buddhism, this whole idea of there is no soul, right? You have to stop your mind, you have to still your mind, you have to negate the mind, you have to make the mind zero. So somewhere these concepts have also come in, and what you're seeing today is a whole stew that has been made by mixing of all these concepts.
Okay. Prabhu, then this term of Chakra Yoga, right? Which means 6 chakras, but we know we have 7 chakras. So how come only...
Yeah, when the 7th chakra, the Sahasrara chakra or the Brahmarandra, which Krishna spoke about, so that opens up after all the 6 chakras. That is the exit point. But primarily we are dealing with the 6 chakras.
Okay.
So from the Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, our Anahata, so Vishuddha, Agya, right? So Manipura chakra. So we are talking about, so those 6 chakras are what a yogi interacts with, right? And by raising the energy through those chakras, one tries to open up the 7th portal, and that is how one tries to make his exit out of this body. Yeah.
Okay, so we call it the Sat chakra because you're primarily trying to deal with the 6
of them. Yes.
Okay, and then this these three terms, Adibuta, Adidaiva, Adiyagya, it refers to the governing principle of those three. So
Right.
this word Adi, can we say that a translation for that would be controller, like the controller of Adibuta, or how would you actually translate that word in those three,
Like
in this context, these three?
As the primeval, as the source, as the origin source, in that level. So it is, so ultimate, so if you were to put it, Krishna has a potency called as material energy, and that manifests as these 24 elements. Krishna has a potency called as the controlling potency that manifests as these different devatas, the demigods. Krishna has this potency of the spiritual potency, right? And we discussed yesterday that is what is manifesting as the individual living entities, also as a consciousness in the living entities, like that. So this is also connected to that earlier yesterday's reality of learning to see everything's connection to Krishna. So this Adibuta, Adideva, Adiyagya are also from that understanding that ultimately Krishna is his nature. Krishna is empowering those devatas. So that is how, when we said that the universal form is that embodiment of all the devatas, it is said, if you integrate all the devatas and create a body-like structure, that is a universal form, like that. So the primeval or original origin, that would be a good, philosophical understanding of that word.
So therefore, when we talk about Adiyagya, even when we're referring to the 2.0 yagya, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We would say that Krishna is also the origin of such yagyas.
So he is the one who is witnessing that yagya, and he is the one who's giving ultimately the result. He is the one who's awarding that result.
But there, it doesn't seem like the translation would be like the source. It would be more like the reciprocator, but not so much the source,
Like, yeah, so for that yagya process to function, right, there has to be somebody who's the source of this principle of this yagya, like that. Yeah,
or the process, or
yes, like that,
or something like that. Yeah, and actually, you mentioned just now how the devatas or Krishna is the embodiment, let's say, of all the devatas. And we call that the universal form. But just like there isn't an actual form of government, right? It's just more like a concept. So similarly, when it comes to the universal form, I'm thinking about the 11th chapter of the Gita, right? So is it not an actual? It is an actual form also, isn't it? I don't know.
Actually, Srila Prabhupada explained that the universal form is actually a conceptual form or an imaginary form. It is not that there is somebody standing there. The word that is used there is as Purusha. There are prayers to this Purusha also, prayers to this universal form, right? And that universal form is it's a philosophical conceptual understanding. It is not that there's a physical person standing there. So that is why this is the imaginary form Prabhupada mentions about that. And
but then
the
11th, Arjuna so scared of? Arjuna was so scared of.
Exactly. So the universal form that Krishna shows in the 11th canto, in the 11th chapter, is not this specific universal form of creation that we are talking about. Krishna shows the time factor. Krishna's time is that universal form. But if you want to understand Krishna as the creation, you will see in the 8th canto this description, and in the 2nd canto especially this description of Bhagavatam. You will see there's a beautiful description of universal form as this this Adi Deva, as entire creation. It is described that his bones are the mountains, his veins are the rivers, the different devatas, even the 4 sections of the society form his different parts of the body, and how the different devata, the sun and the moon are his eyes. There's a description given like that in the 2nd canto of Bhagavatam. So that is a
So that's
creation explanation of universal
that's
form.
the allegory, right? Allegory. That's the allegorical kind of form,
Again,
which is imaginary, more imaginary.
Yes.
But in,
Yes.
but in 11th chapter of Gita, there's like two universal forms. There's that Kala form, right? That was so, kind of horrifying to Arjuna.
Right.
But then there was also another version of a universal form, wasn't there?
Yeah. So there was, so basically Krishna in the 11th chapter, he just shows that Kala form. This is how our acharyas also explain that this universal form, in fact, Krishna shows universal form multiple times. So once he also shows it to Duryodhan. When Duryodhan wanted to arrest Krishna, when Krishna came as a messenger before the war, as a peace messenger before the war, he wanted to arrest Krishna. Then Krishna shows one universal form there. Then he shows another universal form to Arjuna. This specific universal form is known as a time representation of universal form, not the creation representation as this Adideva is being referred to here. So even in there, if you read the 11th chapter description, he says, oh, it's so bright. I see so many mouths, so many heads, right? He doesn't talk anything about the creation being visible there. He says, okay, I'm seeing the different devatas are offering pujas, but finally he says, I'm now seeing all these warriors are entering into your mouth and they are getting crushed. Just like how these fireflies, they are attracted to fire and they are destroyed. So he talks about the death aspect, and time is that. Ultimately, time is the one that is causing destruction, like that. So that is a different that way. Okay.
Yeah, but
yeah.
In that 11th chapter, didn't Krishna also show his four-arm form?
Yeah. So that is not the universal form. That is different. Yeah, that is different. So when we go to that section, I think it will be more clear. That is not the universal form. Okay.
Oh, but that Kala universal form, that is an actual form, though, right?
So again, that also is the Krishna showing a conceptual understanding of how time looks like. Okay. It is not that Krishna is standing there as time like that. No, it's he gave that vision to Arjuna. Look, I'm showing you past, present, and future right now as my time factor, like that.
Okay, Prabhu.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Let's hear from Santaji. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
So, question. First of all, thank you very much, Prabhuji. So, yes, you are telling in very interested manner and all, we are able to hear and able to understand. So, my question is, you mentioned this Adideva, Adibuta and all, right? So, and you also mentioned that whenever the deceased, the person, whatever the understanding of the person, and you mentioned that this is treated as a tamas.
Disease as tamas, yes.
Tamas, right?
Yes.
And in Advaita, we need to accept it and we need to try to come out and come to sattva. That's what you mentioned.
Right.
So how we need to do that? Means how, suppose I'm suffering like maybe I have digestion problems or some problems are there. We are suffering and body pains. We are not able to do whatever devotional things we wanted to do. I understand, okay, that is tamas or it is because of my previous karma as I need to bear it, okay, I'm accepting, but how I can come out and do whatever required?
Right. Okay, good. See, suppose if I'm suffering from a physical disease, I may take a medicine, if I'm suffering from, say, fever, I will take a paracetamol, but the intention why you are taking that paracetamol defines which perspective are you looking at. Somebody will take that paracetamol just to suppress the fever or whatever, deal with the disease. That is the physical version. Somebody will take that paracetamol understanding, oh, I'm suffering from my past karma or whatever, and therefore I need to get over that. Somebody will take it that way. Somebody will take that paracetamol thinking that, oh, I'm not able to do my spiritual activities because of this fever. I'm not able to go to the temple. I'm not able to meditate. I'm not do my chanting and spiritual activities, my devotional activities. So let me take this paracetamol so that I can engage in Krishna's service. So you see, there are three different intentions. Though externally the action is taking paracetamol, but their intentions are very different. And that is how these three perspectives of reality also change. So when you are going through a certain medication, right, because it is ultimately facilitating if your intention is, it is ultimately going to facilitate my spiritual activity, even that so-called worldly medication also is a part of your devotional activity. You see, that is how powerful intentions work. That is why in the third, fourth chapters and fifth chapter also we discuss this concept, that how, actions are not which are binding us, it's our intentions which are binding us to this world. And that is the approach. When you develop that kind of a spiritual dimension of real, when you develop that spiritual perspective, then we also learn to change those motivations and your intentions and operate at that level, like that. So yes, if you are diseased, you go through medication, and but with the understanding that this is helping me, not that I go take this meditation so that I can go do more gratification, like that. I hope you understood this difference. All right. Okay, so let's okay, one more question from Renuka ji. Can you please unmute yourself?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, my question is related to the three things that you've mentioned: the facility, the knowledge, and the experience part.
Yes.
And the terminology used is physical part is Adibuta, metaphysical is Adideva, and spiritual is Adhyatma. Now, I'm just going back to some part wherein, we discussed the three miseries of the material world, which also have the same terminology.
Right.
Adi
Yes.
Bhautik, Adi Daivik, Adi Adhyatmik. So does that also has any relation to the facility, knowledge, or experience, or are those miseries independent of this concept that we're talking?
Right. Good question, actually. So these terms, some of you might have heard it in respect to the kleshas. Kleshas means worldly sufferings, right? Worldly miseries. So this suffering that you experience, not misery, specifically suffering. Miseries are external, but sufferings are internal. So kleshas are referring to those sufferings. And in this context, when certain things of this world, are disturbing us, right? Which means the other living entities of this world, things that are outside of me, which are part of this external material nature, when they are disturbing us, we say that is Adibhautika Klesha, right? So in the sense that the domain is part of the facilities of this world. So there may be other living entities involved, but from my experience point of view, those living entities are also part of my creation of their facilities for my interaction, right? Likewise, when I say Adi Daivika Kleshas, calamities that are happening. Why are calamities happening? Because devatas are controlling. So therefore, so if you understand the connection, that the word Adi Deva there is used from the understanding that, oh, there are certain cosmic controllers, and because of the disturbance in their operations, I'm experiencing some misery. Then Adhyatmika, my own internal miseries. So the self. So there, the conception of the self is with respect to my own body, mind, etc., etc. So these are personal sufferings. So if you kind of broaden the understanding of, if you understand the principle behind those terms, you can do that one-to-one correlation. But here we are not talking about kleshas. We are not talking about the worldly sufferings. We are talking about a whole different perspective of reality, right? So that's a subtle difference. Hope that clarifies. Okay. All right. So looks okay. That brings us about to end of today's discussion. Okay, great. Right. So yes. So see you also. Like I said earlier, next week we'll not be having any classes. That's your study break weekend, and we'll resume with the soul of Bhagavad Gita. So chapters 9 and 10 and 11 is something that we'll discuss, and hopefully 12. Let's see how the pace goes. We'll discuss that in the next week and in subsequent classes. So let's now end with our concluding prayers. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all so much for joining us. And a little teaser for all of you. The first session of the 9th chapter, personally, I will say that will change your whole perspective to spiritual life. In fact, your whole vision of reality, your whole vision of what spirituality is going to change in that one class. So make sure you don't miss that session. I will say that is one of the, that has always been in the past, been the highlight sessions of this course. So I hope you also will connect very strongly with that session. So please don't miss after the break when we come back. Please don't miss the first session. If possible, be there live so you can ask any other questions that you may have connected to that. So thank you all so much for your wonderful company, and see you all in the weekend after the next. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.